There have been a number of factors which have driven the turbulence, but I think one of the most important has been what's been going on with the euro. And there's been concerns about the credibility of whether the euro is going to still be around in 5-10 years' time. And that has led investors to run off to safe investments. Those are perceived to be the US Treasuries, Bund market, German government bond market, and to an extent the UK gilt market. I think the euro will survive. There's a huge amount of political capital which has been put into generating support for the euro for the last 20-30 years. So I think it will survive. How it's going to survive is a moot point, and there's a number of different ways which you can see that happening. Firstly, clearly governments have got to stop spending money. They've spent far too much money historically. They've now got to go into a path of fiscal rectitude, which is difficult for them and will take some time to administer. So it's not an overnight solution, it's a solution which we'll see over the course of the next 4 or 5 years for the more profligate nations. A second solution, a bit more radical solution, would be for the governments to cut the payments, take a haircut on the bonds. So rather than paying you back 100, they'd pay you back 70p in the pound whenever the bonds mature. That would be very bad news, because a whole pile of banks would then go bust on the back of that, because they've got a whole pile of those bonds on their balance sheet. That would be truly catastrophic, because that would then ripple its way throughout the whole of the world, and they don't want to cause that problem again, because we've already had credit crunch number 1. That would create credit crunch number 2, which would probably be worse than number 1. Another solution would be for Germany to literally spend vast amounts of their own taxpayers' money to bail out the likes of Greece and Ireland. And effectively that means Germans are paying for the retirees of Greek retirees, which is just uncomfortable, and politically I think it's probably unacceptable. So the most likely solution, I think, is that Europe goes on down the route of quantitative easing, which has been undertaken in the States and undertaken in the UK, where in effect the European Central Bank goes and buys the debt of Ireland and Greece and Portugal and Spain and potentially Italy over the course of the next few years. Uncomfortable. The politicians would be very uncomfortable about that, because it would force the euro down, but it's probably the only solution they can see which appeases all of the different parties involved. And the problem with this is it probably means that European interest rates have to go up to counter the fall in the euro. So a slightly uncomfortable result, but that's probably the most likely outcome I can see at the moment. For the Artemis Strategic Bond Fund, there are plenty of opportunities. I'm actually negative yes on government bonds, the reasons being that interest rates are broadly going up around the world. But on the other side of the equation, I've just been talking there about banks being bailed out effectively by quantitative easing, and support generally for the banking system around the world. And that's why within the Artemis Strategic Bond Fund we have a very high percentage in financials, which we think will benefit considerably after all of these measures which are being introduced. The other major opportunity, I think, is in the high yield market. The main factor which drives the performance of these bonds is the outlook for defaults. And defaults are falling, will continue to fall for at least another year, because growth is looking reasonable. And furthermore, those companies which actually were going to go bust, went bust in the course of recession in the last year or two. So those companies are still offering reasonable yields, and we think will generate reasonable returns, and are not correlated with the underlying government market. So if government yields go up, these yields tend not to. Now, I'm very glad to be managing a strategic bond fund in this environment. There are lots of weapons available for me to protect capital in an environment of rising interest rates. Broadly, a bond fund should perform very much in line with what the underlying interest rate environment is doing. A strategic bond fund is not beholden to that underlying interest rate environment. So yes, I'm very glad to be managing a strategic bond fund. This is exactly the right time to be doing just that.